Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, the headlines in the papers as usual, and it's a good day for politics. Lots of cracking good stories there. Martin Amis, the novelist, attacking Jeremy Corbyn for being third-rate and undereducated, sounding more and more like his father, Kingsley Amis, I think. And David Cameron talking about women's pay, as you heard on the news there. We'll be talking a lot more about that as well. Sunday Telegraph has a story about the cabinet split over the tax credit cuts. Another of our themes today, you'll be surprised to hear. And then this is very interesting, there's the Mail on Sunday, and they have reported the same story that you heard on the BBC News, where we said, I'm not sorry, says Cameron. They're saying, I'm sorry. We're going to try and Blair, sorry. We're going to disentangle that later on. Fillings rot your tooth, says the Sunday Telegraph. Good news and bad for Corbyn, says the Independent Sunday. And we are failing young people, a leading Tory. That's David Willits, tells David Cameron. David Willits, more of a thorn in the flesh of David Cameron, I think, than anyone expected at the moment. Matthew Dancona, first of all. Welcome to you both, Catherine and Matthew. Matthew, first of all, tax credits, the big story of the week, starting in the House of Lords tomorrow. Absolutely,
and Andrew Rawnsley covers this very well, as you'd expect in his Observer column. Really, this is a clash between Cameron's desire to create a one-nation conservatism and austerity, which carries on very, very harshly and powerfully. And what you've got here now, I think, is a critical mass where it's actually taking parliamentary form. We saw it in the Commons last week, and tomorrow it's going to hit the Lords. And it's a presentational problem, a political problem, but actually it's also a material problem because...
Is it a constitutional problem?
Well, it could become a constitutional problem because the Lords is not meant to oppose the Commons except in very specific circumstances. And I suspect that we could end up with a real deadlock here. Perhaps the worst deadlock there's been since the NHS plan caused problems.
Because as I understand it, the Lords is not allowed to overrule the Commons on finance bill matters. And this is not a finance bill matter, it's a separate matter.
That's right.
There was
a ruling last week that it is not a financial bill, so the Lords can go ahead and rebel. And my understanding is that the Tory leadership in the Lords is not sure yet whether it has the numbers tomorrow to get the vote through. It's going to be a really interesting day.
Do you give any credence to the suggestions that David Cameron would flood the Lords with 100 Tory peers if this goes ahead?
I don't, for the same reasons that Andrew Rawnsley spells out, which is that it would look absolutely disastrous for a government that's presenting itself as one nation, compassionate conservative, to suddenly produce 150 ermine-clad Tories to make its point. It's not, as Andrew says, a good look.
Now, Catherine, I introduced you at the beginning of the show as one of the leaders of Britain's newest political party. Explain.
Well, earlier this year, I set up the Women's Equality Party with Sandy Toksvig. We have, in fact, a wonderful leader in Sophie Walker as well. I'm the president of the party and Sandy is our MC. We have 6 core objectives around gender equality, achieving it fast, and we earlier this week launched our first policy document with a raft of policies to make it easy not just for us to show the way towards gender equality, but we're inviting the other parties to look at what we're doing and, in fact, to steal our policies if they like. We will be standing in elections next year. We are open for membership. If anybody wants to check out our policies, www.womensequality.org.uk.
Now, very good, very good. Now, do you think it's an entire coincidence that top of the BBC News this morning is David Cameron talking about, and we'll have Nicky Morgan as well, on pay gap and women's pay?
Not only do I not think that this is a coincidence, but that August Organ, the Mail on Sunday, says, in fact, in its piece today, it attributes David Cameron's decision to make this move on closing the gender pay gap, but the government has come under pressure from the recently formed Women's Equality Party.
You go. So, power before you've had
but you know, it is a very good start for us as well as the government. But that's all it is. There needs to be a lot more detail on this. And as mentioned in your own report on it, the gender pay gap is virtually closed below the age of 40, but after that opens wide again. So, you know, that's why you need a whole range of policies to address this on things like shared parenting, you need ways to retain the female workforce.
OK, now I said in the paper headlines that the Independent on Sunday had good news and bad news for Jeremy Corbyn.
That's right.
We have inevitably picked the bad news there,
Yes,
Matthew.
absolutely, half empty. There's a story here about Simon Dangsuk, the fairly reliably anti-Corbyn MP, Labour MP, announcing that he will present himself as a stalking horse candidate next year if Labour does badly in the elections. And this is interesting partly because it's the first time this has happened, but it raises the question of what would happen if such a challenge was made. The rules governing the Labour leadership are very complicated, but more to the point, the electorate has now been changed to elect people like Jeremy Corbyn.
I was going to say, if he challenges Jeremy Corbyn, either Jeremy Corbyn wins again, or somebody like Jeremy Corbyn, John McDonnell, will be coming on later on. I mean, it'll be another left-winger, won't it?
I cannot see between then and now a change in the complexion of the membership occurring that would enable someone to arrive who was markedly different to Jeremy Corbyn. In fact, the irony is that such an assault on his leadership might, ironically enough, end up strengthening it.
OK. Catherine, your next story from The Observer.
There's a report saying that the idea of freezing eggs for women as a way of delaying the decision over having children is a false hope. This is interesting because there are several big companies now offering this as a kind of perk to their female executives. And what is being pointed out here is that biologically speaking, it is only part of an answer. It is nowhere near, again, addressing the issues we were talking about. There has to be a way of making it possible for women to have children and then return to the workforce, and that has to do with sharing the responsibilities as well as the opportunities of parenthood.
These are by and large issues which Labour MPs have been very interested in over the period. Do you think if we get dissident Labour MPs, some of them maybe moving over in the direction of the Women's Equality Party?
Well, our door is open for any conversation.
She said. OK. Matthew, now, explain to us this great apparent clash between the BBC News saying Blair does not apologise for Iraq war and the Mail on Sunday, who had a very strong day today, saying Blair apologises for Iraq war. Can the two positions be reconciled?
Well, I think this is what Blair would have called a third way apology. Basically, he's doing what used to be called pre-Buttle in the days of New Labour, which is to get your retaliation in first. The long-awaited Chilcot report on the Iraq war. And what he's saying here is essentially what he said before. He apologises for the fact that the intelligence was wrong. He goes a bit further than he's gone before about the mistakes made in planning.
Isn't that absolutely crucial, though, because it was what happened to Iraq after the war, where all the people were killed.
The absence, or rather not the absence of a Marshall Plan, but the refusal to follow the one that was built up by Colin and Powell was the key error. So that is an important moment. But it's wrong to suggest that Blair is saying sorry for the war itself. He's not. He's saying sorry for certain aspects of it. But I think
can't apologise for getting rid of Saddam.
He cannot bring himself, and in fact he says specifically you can't apologise for getting rid of a monster like that. So there'll be a strange cocktail here of defiance and humility, which we'll see more and more of as Chilcot hoves into view.
But he also admits that the war fueled the rise of ISIS.
Yes, but only as a kind of statement of the obvious. I don't think he's taking much blame for that. And indeed, ISIS principal objective is to renew the caliphate. So it's not specifically to do with the war.
Catherine, the other big issue politically over the week has been this sugar tax idea, backed by some Tories, opposed by other Tories. Very interesting. And you've got Dominic Lawson.
Yes, Dominic Lawson, who I'm afraid I'm singling out for getting it wrong, not right, because he sees...
Dominic.
Yes, I'm sorry. But he is on the side that sees the sugar tax as being something that is against poorer Britons. Whereas, in fact, if you understand the way this works, it's the other way round. There is a shocking health gap between the rich and poor in this country. If you're a man in Blackpool and you have 10 years less of life expectancy than a man in Kensington and 18 years less healthy life expectancy. And one of the main reasons for that is because there is so much sugar hidden in processed food, and processed food is cheaper than fresh food in many cases. So
Though,
this is
as somebody said today, an awful lot of people just like it. They
Yes.
like their twirly-whirlies. They don't want to be told by millionaire rocket-chewing chefs not to eat their twirly-whirlies and their Galaxy chocolates. and so
Indeed,
forth.
but that's the reason I'm pointing this out, is that if they understood that what they were being condemned to by a system that makes it cheaper and easier for them to eat unhealthy food than to eat healthy food, that they are actually being condemned to less healthy life than rich people. It's
So
a kind of
this
apartheid.
is nanny state, but justified nanny state. There's been a lot of comparisons made back with the attack on tobacco and smoking, and saying this is the new front line in terms of health.
Yes, and I suspect it will be, because people are becoming more aware of mortality, of longevity, and that sort of thing. I don't think there's anything intrinsically wrong with the state getting involved in it, but I'm sure that there will be a recoil from it, because people have in this country a strong sense of disliking the nanny state. But I agree with Catherine. I think you have to look very carefully at what's going on.
Everything we've talked about so far has been Brito-centric. But it's very, very interesting what's going on in the States at the moment.
Yes.
Hillary Clinton is shouldering her way to the front of the pack.
Indeed. At one point, it looked like the Democrats, who are in the process of choosing their leader, might, as it were, kind of go for the Corbyn-type figure. There's somebody called Bernie Sanders who's been doing very well. And Hillary was seen as being quite damaged by there's been a huge controversy over her use of a private email account and over what happened in Benghazi. This week she sailed through a hearing on Benghazi, and she has had really the best week she's had for ages. She is moving out in front. Biden isn't going to stand for the Democratic nomination. So she looks like she has a pretty clear run at the White House at this point.
It would be so interesting if she was elected. She'd be the second oldest president at her inauguration, just behind Reagan. So someone who started off as the first lady in the first Clinton presidency would become the voice of experience. It's a fascinating story.
Dynasties.
It's a great
That's
story.
But that's of course how women break through. You know, it's often as wives of or daughters of, and you know, we'd prefer that it was more direct as a route, but if this is the way, then...
What about the harassed-looking woman who's been running Talk, meanwhile?
Baroness Harding. Well,
Is there any more to say about this?
well, I think perhaps someone should give her a tutorial in how to deal with crisis management, because for an organisation that's facing the prospect, as described in the Sunday Telegraph, that there may well be millions have to pay out for hack attack, in other words, class actions and so on, being a possibility. She's being very mealy-mouthed, and instead of coming out with the kind of humility you'd expect, it's it's not as big as we thought, and not really that big a deal.
Right. Okay. Just time. We're almost out of time. Just to tell us, Catherine, about the secret story behind the 007 release.
Yes, well, this is an article complaining about how little time the supposedly strong female character has on screen. But I know that the Suffragette movie, which of course came out earlier this month, only came out earlier this month because it was elbowed aside by James Bond.
So
they were
Suffragette
supposed to
threw herself in front of the Bond
exactly.
juggernaut.
So she had to move very, very fast to get away from that.
Go that girl. Thank you both very much indeed. That's very interesting.